And we're off. Hello everybody, welcome back again. I am delighted today to introduce you to my friend and colleague Priya Tew. Priya and I have been crossing paths, I think, over the past couple of years, particularly at Woman on Fire. And she's just been doing a lot of work on the media and on television, really talking sense about nutrition, which I think is so badly needed because there's such a lot of mythology out there around what eating healthy really means, particularly for women, and weight gain. And I know eating disorders is another area of interest for her. So thank you for joining us, Priya. We're delighted to have you. Could you just maybe start off with filling us in a little bit about your background?
Sure. So I'm a dietitian, which means I'm registered with the Health Professions Council. I can get slapped on the wrist if I say anything wrong and struck off the register. So I have to be very well behaved, which is good news because it means I can only really say what the evidence tells us. So I have to go back and look at all the research each time when I'm asked a question about something. My background, I have got a degree in nutritional sciences, which I did in Southampton, and then I have gone on and done a postgraduate diploma, which made me a dietitian, and I've got a master's in dietetics as well.
So you know what you're talking about.
Yeah, very much kind of grounded in always looking at what is the research telling us.
Great. And I think that's so important to have some evidence, because there's a lot of gurus and experts out there, you know, with products to sell and books to push. So I think it's going to be really great to talk to an expert who is, you know, who's a fellow science nerd and who believes in evidence-based practice.
And I have a book.
So I wanted to kick off because, you know, I'm kind of in the middle of talking about women and back pain particularly, and pelvic pain is another huge interest of mine. So is there such a thing as an anti-inflammatory diet?
Well, if you initially asked me that question, I'd probably go, yeah, no. However, if you have a bit of a read around things, there are foods that are pro-inflammatory and there are foods that are more anti-inflammatory. Okay. So I would say there is not one per se anti-inflammatory diet. Okay. There is no kind of title where if you type that in, it suddenly comes up with the same standard diet each time. But there are definitely factors that influence inflammation in the body.
So what are some of the, I mean, is sugar the devil when it comes to inflammation?
Do you know, interestingly, when you read into this area, sugar doesn't really come up that much.
Ooh, okay.
I know. So definitely high glycemic index foods come up. So those are foods that cause our blood sugars to rise more quickly. Okay. So that would include sugary foods for sure. Okay. But just the word sugar isn't actually something that comes up that much. It's a lot more complicated than that. And I think the problem when we start concentrating on one nutrient is it really oversimplifies the science. Absolutely.
And I think, you know, that seems to be what the current research is telling us, that, you know, the issue is more about insulin resistance and creating, you know, and obesity, obviously, but creating that inflammatory milieu within the body. So there's no such thing as bad food. I suppose when we talk about sugar, we're really looking at added sugar to foods and the different types of sugars that are out there. So, you know, a lot of it comes down, I think, to common sense to a large degree, doesn't it? You know, eating mostly a plant-based diet, knowing where your food comes from, staying away from packaged and processed foods. Yeah. You know, are there any foods that you would particularly see as anti-inflammatory? I mean, are we looking, for example, at foods that are high in vitamin C, things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So foods that are anti-inflammatory are the antioxidants. So these are the ones that will come in and, you know, they will deal with those free radicals for us, which are going to be around in an inflammatory state. Okay. So vitamin C is our big one, and there's definitely some studies showing. So one of the ones I read was having 70 grams of vitamin C a day from vegetable soup. So it wasn't a supplement. Nice and easy vegetable soup had decreased the level of some of these pro-inflammatory markers in the body. Okay. Vitamin E is the other big one. So that's found in things like our nuts, our vegetable oil, avocado. And again, that's definitely playing a role in being anti-inflammatory.
Sure.
And then some of the other big ones, omega-3s.
Yes.
So that's our oily fish. And that's one that is talked about a lot when you look into the evidence for rheumatoid arthritis, for example. So that's a very inflammatory state in the body.
Yeah.
And there is a lot of evidence around that helping reduce things like joint pain and reducing the levels of some of the markers like tumour necrosis factor, alpha, for example.
Okay.
So it is all coming to a plant-based diet to some extent. Plants and fish definitely are better foods for us to be eating, and whole grains as well.
Yeah. So again, carbs aren't the devil either, because I think there's been, over the past couple of years, there's been a lot of talk, and publicity about things like the paleo diet and the maybe a ketogenic diet, which are quite low carb diets, but they're not, I don't feel like they're good long-term strategies for people, because just in terms of energy availability, and I think we have to stop demonizing whole categories of foods. What are your thoughts on for example, paleo or ketogenic? I mean, are they good strategies for healthy living?
I think the ketogenic diet plays a role because it is actually a therapeutic diet that is used for people with specific medical conditions. Yeah. I don't think it plays a role for the bulk standard population. Yeah. And that's where we've gone a bit wrong there. Some of these diets have kind of crossed over into the general kind of domain, and they shouldn't have done. Okay. In terms of paleo, I don't agree with that at all. So I'm very much, I eat carbohydrates 3 times a day. I encourage people I work with to, unless there's a specific reason that they shouldn't be. And I think that the paleo diet has then, along with clean eating, actually led to an increase in disordered eating. And that's certainly what I'm seeing in my practice, is so many people are confused and are cutting out whole food groups.
The bad foods.
Yeah. Yeah. And they're thinking that they're making some benefits to their body and that they're being healthy. And actually it's not. It's making their diet unhealthy. Because
it becomes very narrow. And then I think as well, the stress that they have, this orthorexia, I believe is the term, the rules about good foods and bad foods. And, particularly I see that with young female athletes, who are maybe in sports that already have an emphasis on a certain body shape. I think we have to be very careful about, the female athlete triad, or red S, and just being very careful about how we influence susceptible minds, young teenage girls particularly coming up. So would it be safe to say that, one of the best strategies that we have out there is following, a Mediterranean style diet, plenty of vegetables, fruit, but community and stress management and sleep, I think, are also a big part of having a healthy lifestyle. That sometimes they're the forgotten parts of the Mediterranean diet as well. I think in traditional Mediterranean diets, people don't sit down to a giant plate full of pasta. It's a side dish, isn't it? Or an appetizer even. Do you think that that vegetarianism is a good strategy in terms of healthy lifestyle? Because that's a question that I get a lot.
I think that certainly following a more plant-based diet is something everybody should be doing. And we all need to be thinking, how much meat are we having, the impact of the environment, sustainability being 2 massive factors. But also when you look at the Mediterranean diet specifically, that is more of a plant-based diet. And the research we have on that diet is huge. We've got links to it helping with blood pressure, with cardiovascular disease, with diabetes. It's kind of the big diseases that we've got coming up now. And that diet is very much focused on lots of fruit and vegetables. It's not just, I have an apple in my day and I have a little bit of kale with my dinner. It's mainly fruit and vegetables with some whole grains, and then fish coming in there and chicken coming in there, but there's not a big emphasis on red meat and saturated fat. It's not that, it's not the standard meat and 2 veg dinner that maybe we grew up with. It's nuts and seeds and the healthy oils like extra virgin olive oil. There seems to be a really nice body of research supporting it in terms of omega-3s as a healthy fat, but also quite anti-inflammatory as well, used judiciously. Yes, absolutely. So it's got the omega-3s in there. It's also got lots of vitamin E in there, which is one we just mentioned, and vitamin C.
Yeah.
And it's low glycemic index, which again helps with the inflammation. So
Win-win.
The Mediterranean diet very much is the one that if anybody says, is there something specific I can go away and research? Yes, go and look at the Mediterranean diet. That's the one to go and look at.
That's the one. Brilliant. So another trend that I'm seeing in nutrition generally are, you know, issues with gluten and dairy. And I see particularly with women, you know, coming into perimenopause, maybe some changing tolerance for those two food groups. You know, and I think gluten-free is in danger of becoming a little bit trendy and maybe ignoring some of the real issues around that. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on those.
I think gluten-free has already become trendy from what I've seen. I find this one difficult because there are definitely people who have got a problem with gluten and with dairy. And I don't have a problem with gluten, but I myself can't eat wheat, for example, and my boy can't eat lactose. So I kind of sit in the middle of, there's definitely people who take this too far and see it as the answer to everything. And then there's other people that have a proper problem.
Yeah.
What we do know through some of the research that's been done on irritable bowel syndrome is that there are definitely a subset of the population who struggle to digest certain foods. And one of those is wheat and one of those is lactose. So partially, I think some people confuse those two and they think that they need to be gluten-free, whereas is it actually gluten or is it wheat? There's only a minor difference, you know, it's one of those things that's slightly hard to tell. And then again, is it actually dairy that's the problem or is it lactose?
Okay.
So sometimes it's tying down what is it that's actually the problem.
Okay.
And we know that also the effect of hormones on the gut plays a role. So when people have gone through the menopause, you know, there's a change in hormones, so that can affect the digestion. So yes, definitely, I think that there can be some people who do have a problem with those foods.
So if you can digest lactose, do you feel like that? I mean, I think if you can, I think it can be a really good source of bioavailable, you know, calcium from a bone health perspective. Do you feel that dairy, if it's sustainably produced, and obviously if you can digest it, is a healthy option for people then? Because I think there's been there was a big swing, wasn't there, away from, you know, it was all low fat milk and, you know, zero fat yogurt and things like that. What are your thoughts on low fat dairy, on fermented dairy versus milk, you know, and is dairy good for us basically?
Huge topic. So dairy, very much good for you if you can tolerate it. And I would say go for the cow's milk variations where you can, because a lot of the plant-based versions aren't fortified and they don't contain as much in terms of protein and calcium.
Interesting.
So going for cow's milk options if you like those and if you can, or making sure if you can't tolerate those, you're getting ones that are fortified. So check what is actually in the product you're having. So for example, I've tried a whole range of milks with my boy and they are so varied as to what them. So it's important to just be checking. In terms of low fat versus high fat, there has been a bit of a shift around in the thoughts of that. Partially that's because nutrition is such a young science, so we're constantly having more research coming out, so thoughts do change. And I know people get annoyed and say, oh, but 10 years ago this was said. Well, yes it was, but that was 10 years ago. And it's good because now we've got more evidence. So now I would definitely be recommending people go for not high fat, because it's actually not high fat, but normal fat versions of foods. So when you have a look at yogurts, if you look at the amount of fat that's actually in them compared to something like your chocolate bar, you'll find it's not very much. It's just they're called full fat products.
Yeah.
I think that can be really misleading, and people think, oh my goodness, I can't have that because it's full fat. Actually, you might only have 5 grams of fat in it per 100 grams. You know, it's not necessarily high at all. So looking at labels is always really good. I think with dairy, it can be really hard knowing what to choose.
Yeah.
So you walk down the yogurt aisle and you are just bombarded. It's massive. And instead of thinking around, should I be having cow's milk? What's the fat content? I would always say to people, read the ingredients and look for sugar.
Yeah.
Because if sugar's not bad, we don't want to be overdosing on sugar. Yeah. So if you're thinking, what shall I choose? Try and go for something that's more natural, as in it's not flavoured, and add your flavouring at home, add your fruit and whatever. Yeah. So a full fat Greek yogurt is always going to be a good option. It's got plenty of protein in it. It's got the calcium in it. Hasn't got added sugar.
Right. Those are really good pieces of advice there. And I think as well, for yogurt particularly, milk and bacteria should be your foundational ingredients. Yeah. Yes. Which brings us nicely on to, talking about bacteria. The microbiome is a really hot topic at the moment as well, and gut health. How can we eat to promote good gut health without having to go to the Amazon jungles, for exotic ingredients? Are there like common everyday ingredients out there that are going to promote a good, healthy bacteria colony in our gut?
Yeah. Brilliant. I love the fact that gut health is so big at the minute, because years ago would not have been seen as sexy to talk about your gut, would it, at all? And now it's just being opened up, which is fabulous. Yeah. So really interestingly, if you look into the history of fermented foods, this is interesting for me because I'm a bit dull in this way, you'll see that each culture used to have its own pile of fermented foods, and if you look at some other cultures, you'll still see that they have those. Yeah. But we have moved over to this more processed diet. These new foods have come in, and we've embraced other cultures within our food and our eating, and we've lost this whole thing of pickling and fermenting. Yeah. So trying to go back to that is a really good step, and we're starting to see this movement where people are doing that. You can definitely make some things yourself at home, and it's actually more beneficial to make fermented foods at home because they're exposed to your bacteria and your environment. So there's some very limited evidence suggesting that when you make the fermented foods at home, that actually you get the bacteria that your gut needs. Okay. And I also read something recently where there's some studies at the minute going on in the UK, Newcastle, I think it is, on sourdough bread. And they were saying that if you buy it, it actually doesn't have very much of those bacteria in compared to at home. Okay. That's a bit sad. So sourdough bread is complicated, I'll tell you, because I've started making it myself.
That's a commitment. That is it's deeper than marriage, because honestly, that sourdough bread, if you don't look after it.
I know I'm making gluten-free sourdough bread at the minute. Wow. A bit of a love-hate relationship going on there, so maybe don't start there. What you can do is start with making your own yogurt. Okay. So you can use a live culture, or you can buy a live yogurt at the supermarket, and you can make your own yogurt. Loads of instructions for that on the internet. It's really simple. You basically you warm your milk up, you stick your culture in, and you leave it overnight in a warm place, and you will end up with yogurt.
Magic.
Magic it is. And kefir is the same. So you can buy kefir grains, and you can do that. Pickles, things like sauerkraut also are quite easy to make. Absolutely. So I'm certainly starting to go down that road myself. I'm experimenting. Yeah.
It's really interesting to see just the availability of different fermented foods. It's really, escalated, I think, dramatically over the past couple of years. People are talking, miso soup and, kimchi. I mean, my barometer is if I can find those things in the middle of rural Ireland, they must be everywhere, because, and I'm seeing them in local shops here, which I think is fantastic. But I think what you're saying is really important as well to take as the next step, where you're actually making your own, because then you have complete quality control over what's going into your food and into your body. It's like, I think that quote from Michael Pollan, The Omnivore's Dilemma, where he talks about, when you go grocery shopping, you want to try and stay around the edge of the grocery store, because that's where all the fresh fruit and vegetables and the fish and the meat and the wine on the way out live. When you start going up and down the aisles and into the processed foods, that's where you end up in trouble.
Although that's not to say all processed foods are negative either, because a tin of tuna is processed.
There you go. See, it's never black and white completely, is it? You know, it's, and I think that's the trap sometimes we can fall into, that all processed food is bad, you know, or all meat is bad, all sugar is bad, because then we wouldn't be able to eat fruit, you know. And I think we have to just be careful about making rules and edicts, because, as you said, the science is changing all the time, but as you also said, primarily plant-based.
Yes.
So I'm seeing some really nice research actually coming out of UCC here in Ireland about gut health and brain health. Are you aware of any connections between gut health and pain? Can, if your digestive system isn't happy, can it affect pain, do you think?
I haven't read anything on that, but I know that that is a big area right now, gut health, and I know that they're finding that you have different types of gut bacteria depending on what inflammatory state your body's in and what disease is going on. So there, I work also in chronic fatigue, and some of the research I've read on chronic fatigue has shown that people who have got chronic fatigue have a different microbiome to people who don't have chronic fatigue.
Interesting.
Really interesting. So is it the bacteria that are the cause, or, you know, what is the cause? What's the cause? What's the symptom? We don't know. But what it does show is that when your body is unwell, or when it's suffering from different problems and different stresses, it does alter your gut bacteria, definitely. So I think by looking after our gut bacteria and thinking more about that, so that's not just fermented foods, that's also thinking pro and prebiotics, that could help.
So can you just clarify, because I know this is an area for confusion for, again, a lot of folks out there, what's the difference between probiotics and prebiotics? So
the prebiotics are what feed the probiotics, basically. So we've got one that's the food and one that is the bacteria. So if you think that your live yogurt, where you've got your culture, it's got the bacteria in it, that is your probiotic. And your sourdough bread and your fermented foods.
Lovely.
Prebiotics are things like Jerusalem artichokes and onions and chicory root. So those are things that actually provide the substrate or the food
to keep the bacteria happy.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Good. And I suppose, you know, we have to stop looking, you know, like you were saying, maybe in isolation at different food groups, but also what's happening in the body, because we know, don't we, that most of our serotonin is produced in the gut as well. So, you know, and pain is obviously, it's 100% an output of the brain. So gut health and brain health and pain, I suppose they're really on a continuum, and making sure that, as you were saying, not to just get the good probiotics in, but to get the prebiotics in to feed them. Do you think dark green leafy vegetables are a good source of prebiotics as well? And again, a great source of fiber as well for us.
Yeah, well, I was about to say fiber is one of these missing links. So definitely fiber is something that we want the bacteria to be feeding on, that's really beneficial for them. And we are meant to be now aiming for 30 grams of fiber a day in our diet. Now, that's just a random number, but generally most people in the UK are not even meeting half of that. So we'll be doubling the amount of fiber we're eating. It's not going to work.
Again, so that would bring us back to our plant-based diet again. I'm noticing there's a common theme in our conversation here today.
Yeah, so, you know, we're talking whole grains. So rather than going for your white, going for your whole meal, adding more grains into your diet even, so things like quinoa and couscous and bulgur wheat and pearl barley. Now, some of those sound quite fancy. They don't have to be. Something like pearl barley is actually really quite inexpensive and easy to get hold of and underused.
Great.
It's also thinking things like keeping the skin on your fruit and vegetables. Eating the skin off your jacket potato, your sweet potato. So it's all those types of things. Adding seeds and nuts in adds fibre in quite easily. And if people were meeting their, I like to say, more than 5 a day for fruit and vegetables, that would be a very simple way to be increasing our fibre intake.
So do you feel that eating organic fruit and vegetables will make a difference? If we're going to be eating the skin, you know, does organic matter?
Apparently not.
Interesting. Controversial.
It is controversial. Yeah, so there has been some research done comparing organic versus non-organic, and apparently there is no difference as long as you wash it.
Okay. And just in plain water?
Yes, in plain water.
Okay, interesting. So, we've been talking about fiber, and of course that brings me back to one of my favorite things to talk about, which is, of course, constipation. And constipation, I think, can have a number of different drivers for it. We know that if the transit is too slow through the gut, we're going to have too much water resorbed, or if we've got pelvic floor issues, that can be a problem in letting go. If someone comes to you and they're having issues with constipation, what pearls of wisdom do you share with them?
I would normally sit down and have a look at, firstly, what do we think the reason for the constipation is? Okay. Because that always plays a role. And then if it sounds like it is a dietary issue, then I would want to have a 3-day diary off them, so I can have a really good look through what they're eating. And generally, the first step is analyze the fiber, analyze the fluid. Yeah. Because those two go hand in hand. So we have 2 main types of fiber in our diet. If we generalize it, we've got the insoluble fiber. So that's the fiber that adds the bulk to your stool. So if you're going for your sausage stool, you want to be having your fiber, and it helps it pass through the system more quickly. Okay. Then we've got the soluble fiber. So this is the one that slows the digestion, and it helps you absorb your nutrients from food. So somebody who has got diarrhea, for example, they might not be absorbing as well. We'd want them to be having more soluble fiber. So it takes longer for the food to go through the system, and they can absorb it better. To slow it down a little bit. So what would some examples of insoluble or soluble fiber be? Okay, this is where it gets confusing, because lots of fruit and vegetables and pulses and beans actually contain both. Brilliant. So it does get a little bit confusing there. So what we tend to say is, if you have constipation, you want to be increasing your fiber. Okay. So specifically, it is the insoluble, but overall we'll just say increase your fiber. So whole grains, wheat bran, fresh fruit and vegetables with the skin on, and beans and pulses, possibly, depending on what your symptoms are. So if I've got somebody who's got wind and bloating and abdominal pain, then I would be staying away from the pulses and the beans with them. Okay. If it does become a little bit complex, then also I'd be wanting to check their fluid, and just seeing, it can be that actually people are over consuming fiber. So they've heard fiber's good for constipation, and they eat loads and loads and loads of fiber, and actually they're eating too much and they haven't got enough fluid to push that fiber through. Yeah. So we need to be pushing the system through as well. So I always like to look at the balance. And then another little top tip. So if I've got somebody whose fiber looks great, they've done some work on their fiber and they're still suffering, then flaxseed is the other thing. I'm a big fan of flaxseed. Are you? So making sure that they take their flaxseed with water, because flaxseed swells in water. But there's now research showing that up to 4 tablespoons can be taken a day, and that can aid constipation. But don't start with your 4 tablespoons. No. Start small. Start with a teaspoon and build it up. But that's the other thing that I would look at with somebody. Great. And do you feel, or do you find that, for people who are having difficulties with pulses and beans, because if we are maybe looking towards more of a plant-based diet, lentils and chickpeas, and other legumes are good options. Do you find digestive enzymes, taking some of those can be a good option, or do you feel that's helpful? No, I wouldn't go down a digestive enzymes route. I would have a look at how much they're having of the pulses and the lentils and things, and look at the specific ones they're having. And then sometimes it's just people are having too much of them. Yeah, in one go, and you can build up your tolerance to them over time. So I'd start them small, start building them up. Also things like washing them. So make sure that when you take them out the tin, that you rinse them again, because that can sometimes be. So the FODMAPs have come out of the bean or the pulse. A FODMAP is a poorly digested short chain carbohydrate, comes out into the water, and then if you haven't rinsed that off, you're left with all this excess FODMAP. Okay. Problem. And then the other thing is, if people are using them dried and they're cooking them, you want to soak them, then drain the water off, then soak them again, drain the water off, then cook them. So there's kind of little tips that you can use that can help people along the way. And I also find that sometimes people are having like a big bowl of a mixed bean salad and they're just overdoing it. They're just having too much of them. There is too much of a good thing sometimes in life.
Absolutely. Well, I think particularly if you're having a giant portion like that and then you're eating a lot of raw greens with them as well, like your raw kale salad on the side, I mean, I think that can just be a little bit of digestive overwhelm for people as well. And they get frustrated then because they've read that kale is good, they've read that beans are good, but, you know, you have to build up to these things, you know, and not monstrous amounts. Do you feel that apple cider vinegar can be beneficial for digestion? Again, it's one of those things that does the rounds, you know, particularly apple cider vinegar with the mother culture in it. Any thoughts on that?
Nothing wrong with apple cider vinegar. Nothing wrong with it.
Anything right with it?
It's just gone a bit OTT.
Yeah.
We do not have any evidence showing that apple cider vinegar really helps with anything apart from it tastes nice on your salad. So yeah, I'm not saying it doesn't help with things, it might do, but a lot of this evidence is anecdotal.
Yeah.
It's just somebody saying, oh, I've taken it and it helps with so-and-so. And then they've written a blog and then they've got a book and there we go. Great for them. I'm not jealous at all, but we don't have the proper evidence that shows us that there is something, that there is a link with apple cider vinegar. So keep it in your cupboard, use it, but you don't need to be drinking gallons of it. And it's not very good in terms of dental health either.
There you go. Good. And so last question then, Priya, is there any evidence to show us, you know, is there a certain amount of water we should be drinking a day? Because again, this is another question that comes up so often. You know, how much water should we drink a day? Do we know?
General guidelines, and that's all we've really got are these generalized guidelines have for patients in hospital. Or are we back?
Yeah, we're back again.
We're back. So we have these general guidelines of the 2 litres a day. That's actually what I tend to use with people, because we can't get too tied down into the specifics. So we do have a specific figure that I would use if I was calculating a tube feed for somebody in a hospital bed.
Sure.
I would look at their weight and then I would calculate it. Generally, I say to people, just try and make sure you're drinking your 8 glasses throughout the day, and monitor how thirsty you are. So quite often people are not even managing a pint of water in the day. We don't want to be going the other way and overloading. So I had someone recently who was drinking 4 litres a day, which is a lot.
That's a lot of stress for your poor old bladder to deal with.
Yeah.
I think that's why I feel like this conversation was really important to have, because there's such a lot of, as I said, myths out there about what's good, what's not okay, you know, what's a good food, what's a bad food. So I really think this has been a very enlightening conversation, and you know, we're going to have to do it again, I think. It was brilliant, Priya. Thank you for sharing all your insights and knowledge, and again for being very practical about it as well. I think a lot of what you were saying actually, you know, primarily plant-based, but paying attention to yourself as well, you know, and I think personalized medicine is the way of the future, you know, because everybody's slightly different in what they can tolerate and, you know, in what they can digest, but also in what they like. Because I was at a conference recently and I remember hearing the speaker say that, you know, well, here's what you need to eat, and these are your nutrients that you need to get in, and it doesn't matter whether or not it tastes good, but this is what you need to eat. And I go, oh, really? Like, you know, life is short. I mean, shouldn't healthy food taste good as well? You know?
Absolutely. You've got to be able to enjoy your food. A massive bit of food is socialization and enjoyment. It's not about just eating because you have to eat.
Yeah, I think that's partly the success, isn't it, of the Mediterranean diet, because maybe it's that whole culture around food, you know, sitting down, community, breaking bread, you know, companion comes from to break bread with. And I think if we can stop treating food as the enemy or something to be very suspicious and leery about and scared of, and just actually to enjoy it, but, you know, like Michael Pollan said, eat real food, less of it, mostly plants.
Good quote.
Priya, thanks a million for joining us. Where can people find you?
Yeah, so you can find me over on my website. So I have quite an active blog, which is www.dietitianuk.co.uk, and you'll be able to find me quite often over on Instagram. So I'm _Pilates_dietitian over there.
Brilliant. And again, just, you know, to wrap this up, that's why I really love your approach, because it's not just food, it's not just movement. And again, we really need to look at the whole person that we're working with. So mindset, food, movement, stress management, sleep, I think it all comes together for a healthy lifestyle.
Absolutely.
Priya, thanks a lot, and let's do this again.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okie doke. Bye for now.
Bye.